Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. This is part 2 of Comrade George Jackson. I implore you, I beseech you to understand his mindset in order to understand what ended up happening next. George was no nonsense. He wrote in a couple of times in a letter to his mother, if worse comes to worse, that's okay. I'll just continue the fight in hell. He believed that it was okay to be unalived in the pursuit of the liberation for black people. He believed this in his soul. And he preached this to his brother, Jonathan Jackson Jr. Do not be afraid to give your life. The only shame in giving your life for your people is if you give your life and you're the only one who's unalived. If you give your life and it's at least an eye for an eye, then that's okay. Jonathan Jackson Jr., he embodied this message, repetitiously put it inside of his own brain. It is okay to give my life for my people.
You're taught a lot of things, but when you see that things aren't like you think they are, then you react. Especially a young person growing up in this day and age, they react violently, and especially when something is happening to maybe a person in your family. Awful, dreadful injustice is happening to someone in your family that you love and respect very dearly.
And so, on August 7th, 1970, he stormed into the courtroom and he said, "All right, gentlemen, I'm taking over now." He was armed to the teeth. He gave other inmates weapons in the courtroom. Ruchell McGee was one of them. In fact, I said in part 1 that Ruchell McGee was a part of the Soledad brothers. That was a mistake. Ruchell McGee was inside of the courtroom when Jonathan Jackson burst inside. George Jackson, Fleeta Drumgo, and John Cluchette are the 3 Soledad brothers. Jonathan Jackson handed weapons to Ruchell McGee and at least 2 other inmates that were inside of the courtroom. They took 5 hostages. The judge was one of the hostages. Well, they ran out of the courtroom with the judge at gunpoint. They put him in a van and they drove off and got about a block away. The police from other counties and etc. surrounded them and started shooting even with the judge in the car. They knew what they were doing. They said these guys have to go and the judge will be collateral damage. How do I know this? Because they unalived everyone in the car. Jonathan Jackson was unalived. The 2 other inmates were unalived. And the judge was unalived. George Jackson had began a relationship with a beautiful black woman named Angela Y. Davis. Most of you know who she is. A revolutionary black woman. And when Jonathan Jackson was unalived on August 7th, on August 14th, excuse me, on August 14th, they accused Angela Davis of conspiracy, of being involved in the courthouse break-in. They said that she supplied Comrade Jonathan Jackson Jr. with the weaponry. They put a warrant out for her arrest. 7 days later, August 14th, she went on a run. She went underground. On October 13th, 2 months later, she was found in a motel in New York City. She went on trial. People in Latin America and people really all over the world were calling for her release. In fact, there were t-shirts and hats with "Free Angela Davis" written on them. And celebrities and all sorts of people, big shots all around the world, were getting involved, calling for her release, saying that she was not involved. George Jackson is quoted as saying in his book that "I'm too proud. I haven't shed not one tear over my little brother, Jonathan Jackson Jr., being unalived because I'm too proud." August 21st, 1971. Doomsday. 1 year and 14 days after Jonathan Jackson was unalived, along with the judge and 2 other inmates. Well, George Jackson was in the visiting area on this day, August 21st, 1971. According to the police, because the inmates have a different story, but according to the police, George Jackson was able to get a weapon in, a real thing, from his lawyer. He hid the weapon in a wig. Somehow he was able to get the wig and the weapon from the visiting area all the way back to the living area. Today, that would be impossible. But somehow, back then, in 1971, he was able to get the weaponry back. And so he took a police hostage, a correctional officer, at G Point. And he made this correctional officer open multiple inmate cells. The inmates came out. Chaos ensued. 6 of the inmates took police officers hostage. Fleeta Drumgo, one of the inmates accused, along with Comrade George Jackson, in the unaliving of the CO that started all of this, is one of the inmates that was let out of his cell, and is one of the 6 inmates that was eventually charged with murder. The 6 inmates come out. Shortly after, they come out and take 2 inmates and 2 guards hostage. The first killing, it happens. George Jackson takes a correctional officer and he unalives him with the weapon. Boom, boom, boom. He knocks him down. He puts him in a cell. 6 inmates, including Fleeta Drumgo, were then accused, along with Comrade George Jackson, of hitting and geeing down 2 correctional officers and 2 white inmates. This bringing the death total to 5. George Jackson first unalived one with his weapon. The 6 of the inmates, because there were dozens of inmates let out of their cells. 6 of them took 2 COs hostage and 2 white inmates hostage. After George Jackson unalived the 1 correctional officer, they then unalived 2 other correctional officers and 2 white inmates and stacked their bodies up inside of a cell. And well, they claim that George Jackson made a run for it. He tried to escape. And so the gun tower, well, they unalived him on August 21st, 1971. It doesn't stop there. It gets much deeper. Because Pennell, one of the inmates who was accused of murder for being let out of his cell, one of the 6 inmates who, according to the paperwork, he stuck a CO in the neck, CO Breckenridge. Pennell recently, 6 or 7 years ago, was unalived on a yard in the California State Prison. This unaliving of him caused a riot in which 11 inmates were wounded with stab wounds. There was a lot of fallout from this situation. More fallout than this, because Comrade George Jackson's attorney, a white woman, ended up being unalived by the Black Panther Party because they felt like she had turned on him. And so you have to understand the mindset and the atmosphere of prison when I got there. My first time in prison was in March of 1994. I said that I did over 22 years in prison, referring to a level 4 yard. But my first time in prison was in March of 1994. We're talking about nearly 30 years ago. And this is only 23 years removed from the tragedy of Comrade George Jackson. And so the atmosphere and the militancy on the yard is still palpable at this juncture. To understand the rioting that began to happen in the California penal system, you must first understand the mindset of the inmates who began to cause these riots. Engendered in us was a sense of pride and manhood conveyed and bequeathed to us by Comrade George and others. And we want to do them proud then. We wanted to do them proud then, and we continue to want to do them proud now. Stay tuned, people. Next one coming up.